So on a scale of 1 to 10, I'm going to ask you to rate your negotiation skills. That means a 10 is you go in there, there's a win-win, you feel very confident, you feel that you are getting what you wanted to get, and you do it each and every time. So that's a 10. And a 1 being you think you're a terrible negotiator, and you go into negotiations always feeling that the other person has got the better of you. Well, wherever you are on a scale of 1 to 10 in your ability to negotiate, my guest today is going to take you to the next level. He is a master negotiator, the author of Entrepreneurial Negotiation. He's an instructor at the program of negotiation at Harvard Law School. So let's talk about making sure that in 2021, your negotiation skills go to a whole new level. So a very warm welcome to you, Samuel Mooly Dinnar. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Nadia. It's a pleasure being here.
Okay, so let's start with your book, Entrepreneurial Negotiation, and it's got a whole subtitle. Tell us about that.
It's managing and understanding the relationships that are critical for your entrepreneurial success. And by that, we mean that the book is focused around entrepreneurship and negotiation. So the special negotiation situations that happen in startups, in founders of startups, in entrepreneurial and intrapreneurial ventures. And the definition of entrepreneurship is basically how do you get things done when you don't control all the resources. So if you control the resources, it's project management. But entrepreneurship, you're trying to raise funds for a company that doesn't exist. You're trying to sell a product that doesn't exist. You're trying to recruit people to come join a vision that hasn't been validated without getting paid yet. So everything in entrepreneurship is a negotiation. And it was a niche that wasn't filled. My background is in entrepreneurship. I was in startup companies and involved in many of them for 25 years. And no one has addressed the negotiations that are specific to this niche.
So what are the biggest mistakes, Mooly, that people make?
All right. So I see you've read the book, because what we did is we researched what's unique to entrepreneurship and negotiation. I mean, negotiation skills are critical for any business, any family relationship, any relationship, basically. And we researched and found what are the unique factors for entrepreneurial negotiation. And while doing that and interviewing many, many entrepreneurs, we came out with the 8 common mistakes that entrepreneurs make while negotiating. So that is in the book. We actually have the 8 mistakes and 8 case studies of real entrepreneurs. We have video interviews with them as well that reflect those 8 mistakes.
So what is number 1?
They're not in order of precedence, but the number 1 is one that we see very, very common, is that entrepreneurs tend to be self-centered. They're very focused on their perspective, their idea, their vision of how they see the world, their own needs and their desires. And in order to really get someone to buy into their vision, or to invest money in their company, or to buy the product that will be developed in the future, you need to meet people where they are, and you need to find out their interests and their needs and cater to those. And when you're too focused on being self-centered, you miss out on that. For example, one of the things that we think about when we think about entrepreneurs and startup is the pitch, right? How do you perfect your pitch? And I'm sure, Nadia, you've helped many entrepreneurs and founders how to perfect their pitch. And I think in that word, there's already a seed of that mistake, because it's never a one-way pitch. It's always a two-way negotiation. It really depends who you're pitching to, what their needs are, what their interests are, what their fears and concerns are. That's how you can tailor your pitch in order to make it happen. And that requires a negotiation.
It's so interesting you say that, because, you know, so fundamental to everything I teach about presentations or pitching is
exactly
what's in it for the other person.
Right.
And even if you and I are having this conversation now, at the back of my mind, I'm thinking, who's watching us? How can we give value to them? The biggest mistake we make is thinking this is about us.
Right.
So, and is that something you can teach? I mean, you can create awareness in people. How do you teach that?
Yeah. So, I mean, negotiation is a very complex practice. We all do it. We're all negotiators. We've all been negotiating since before we were 2 years old. Anybody who's had kids knows these are the best negotiators. They know what they want. They don't care about anything else. But when you realize that you really need to not just stand for what your needs are, but really find the other person needs and start joint problem solving and finding the trades, you need to have that listening skill as well as pitching skill. And so negotiation is a lot about both of these. And there are skills that can be taught. It's proven. There's theory that's been developed at our program at Harvard for over 40 years. And it's both the theory and the practice. And there are certain processes that you can make sure you follow in order to improve the implementation of those skills.
So let's define, we keep speaking about negotiation.
Yep.
How do you define negotiation?
Well, it's interesting because there are different definitions. I think it's a communication between two or more parties who have differing or conflicting interests. They're trying to come to agreement on a course of action. And in that, you can put almost everything that happens in communications almost there, unless you're printing a one-directional sheet. And even then, you're trying to cater it to the other side and have it meet there. So you're trying to influence, you're trying to communicate, and there are aspects of it that are science, that are being researched. There are aspects of it that are art. And there's a lot of improvisational skills required. There's a lot of strategy, planning, changing course, etc.
Now, what you may not know about Mooly is he also understands Shakespeare and is an avid student of Shakespeare. So I'm curious how and what Shakespeare has taught us about negotiation.
Oh, I think theater in general, Shakespeare in particular, teaches you about conflict and about drama. Unfortunately, a lot of people have this misperception of a good negotiator based on high drama, Hollywood movies, TV series dramas, and they think it will be this crescendo. It's like going to court and thinking, a lawyer is going to pull a rabbit out of the hat at the last minute and change the result. It never happens that way. I mean, they need to be very persuasive and build an argument, but it's usually a much slower process. So theater dramatizes the conflict, but the underlying aspects of conflict, differing interests, emotions, egos, relationships, all those things are present. And in Shakespeare, his choice of words, his language, his rhetoric is magnificent. And where the words end is when the violence begins. And so what we do in mediation or conflict resolution is we try to get people to negotiate as opposed to fight it out, or as opposed to go to court and have somebody else adjudicate.
So when we look at this past year in terms of businesses, mergers, acquisitions, what comes to mind as a skillful negotiation? I don't know if you saw in the news, I just saw that Elon Musk said that he had wanted to take something to Apple and that he was refused a meeting. Did you see that?
I just saw the headline. I didn't even click on it. So I mentioned the factors in entrepreneurial negotiations. One of them is definitely egos and emotions. And some of these founders have been successful because they have been very bold and they have very big egos.
Mm-hmm.
But some of them, and I've been through this myself, a lot of value has been destroyed because of egos and emotions. And in entrepreneurship or in business, especially on this scale, or the times we live in, relationships are key. It's very difficult to acquire a company and keep the employees, or sometimes keep the founder CEO on board for a period and have the negotiations sour the relationship and still expect it to be successful.
And that's something you do. You go into companies, you work with them on trying to make this relationship work post the merger or the acquisition, so to speak. And again, one thinks of skillful negotiation as a win-win. I've also heard the term Batna, your best alternative to negotiated agreement, when one knows what will it take to walk away. So I'm curious if you add some insight to that.
Yeah, so any negotiation, any agreement that will be reached between me and you or the listener or Nadia, or if you're watching this, any agreement that you and I will reach should be better for me than my alternative and better for you than your alternative, right? Otherwise, it doesn't make sense to reach an agreement.
Correct.
Now, many people walk into the negotiation knowing what they want. They know what their aspiration is, but they don't necessarily know what their alternative is. And if that's the case, you may be signing on to deals that you shouldn't, right? So let's say I'm going to buy a car. That's pretty easy because I know one dealership has this price, the other has this price. That is my alternative. I looked at 3 dealers. I know which one the best price value for me is. That's my best alternative to a negotiated agreement with this one. So now I know knowing what my alternative is, it doesn't mean that is the number I'm going to be using as my red line, as my walkaway, as you called it, or what we call in the research, the reservation value. I may have a different walkaway, right? I may say, you know what, that other price is $15,000, but if they give me a price that's $16,000 or below, I'll just buy it here because this dealership is closer. I already have a relationship. I don't want to travel another day. Maybe it'll get sold by the time I get there. So even though the other one is 15, I'm willing to pay 16 to close the deal right now. So that translates. You look at your alternatives, you pick the best one, that translates to your reservation value. And you'd be shocked, or maybe not, when you talk to people, and sometimes I do it myself. There are many cases in life I go in negotiating something and I don't stop to think, what's my alternative? What is the real walkaway number here? And that is the basic planning, doesn't take a lot to do. Yeah.
And that certainly gives you more power.
Yeah, your power in the negotiation comes from your alternative, right? If I know I can really buy this other car at 15, why would I pay 20 here? I will continue to negotiate until I get a price that I like because I know I have the alternative. If I don't have an alternative, or if that alternative is so uncertain and so scary, then I may give in to a deal that's not in my favor. And you know, Nadia, what's really interesting in the times we live in, when we researched entrepreneurial negotiation, we saw these factors that were always heightened in entrepreneurial negotiation. Uncertainty, because the technology is uncertain. You don't know if the company will be around. Is the market going to be there, right? The complexity of the technology and the deal structures are usually very high. I mentioned egos and emotions, and I mentioned relationships. Well, what happened this year is that all negotiations almost have become these kinds of complex, uncertain negotiations where relationships and emotions are very heightened because of what this COVID-19 has done to us. I mean, I was consulting a big energy company when this just started, and we were all scratching our heads. How do we fulfill our contracts when the price of the barrel is just going negative now? Because everything was linked to the price of an oil barrel. And all of a sudden, everything stopped. And people were just needed to get rid of oil barrels, and they were willing to pay for people to take them. You couldn't link to the old contracts. What do you do?
Right.
And so a lot of our life now has become things that were unthinkable a year ago, 10 years ago, are now part of regular life for all of us. And so we're finding the same complexities and uncertainties in our everyday life.
Something that you and I have spoken about is the importance of trust in negotiation. Yes. And there's something about trust. If you and I meet in a boardroom, we see each other, there's body language, there's eye contact. Yes. And so much of my work over the past 9 months has been, how do we establish trust and rapport in a virtual world? And it takes a great deal of attention and deliberation. So you're having to do the same. You're having to teach people virtually, and you're having to teach them to negotiate and build trust virtually. What advice and guidance do you give?
So this is a topic that we really learned a lot about the next year. I mean, I've been working with remote teams and remote managers for a long time, and we'd always advise, you need to mix it up, in person and then online, because you build the rapport, you build the trust by having dinner together, spending a few days on site. Then you can follow up during the year with online videos and phone conversations and emails. The challenge this year has been, it's not just about maintaining relationship, it's creating whole new relationships. And Nadia, you and I have never met in person. Unfortunately, we've never had dinner or gone out for drinks. Our relationship has all been built on meeting almost weekly, but seeing you in a box on video.
That's right. So, with lighting. Don't forget Mooly, with lots of good lighting.
Right. So a lot depends on what the medium is. But also, we have to proactively know what we need to do in order to improve both rapport and trust. And I separate the two. All right. So rapport is how much we get together, we know each other, we get along, our affiliation, our appreciation. You are correct. We miss a lot of the social cues when we are not in person. More than that, we work a lot harder to converse over video, because there's a mismatch between the audio and the sound and the picture, because the quality sometimes is not that great, because all of a sudden you could freeze and disappear, and because we're not experiencing the same environment, right? I could be sitting in a cold room when you're sitting in a warm room. I'm having snow outside, you're not, right? I may be living in a situation where I'm less safe and you're not feeling that. Whereas if we're together, we have that kind of bond as people. Online, we have to make the effort to build these relationships. So let's say, just like you and I did, we have our weekly business meeting, but we said, let's meet and have just a personal conversation to get to know each other better.
And is that something you're recommending to people?
So I am recommending the small talk that we usually have at the coffee corner before we start, or when we go up the elevator together, or we go out for a walk during lunch, doesn't happen on Zoom. So you are preparing not one negotiation meeting. You should look at negotiation as a series of meetings, and they should all be shorter, and there should be more of them. And you should have a clear agenda for each of them. So, for example, and in between, you should say, now let's spend 10 minutes just not on business. Just tell me about your family. Tell me about some other things. Building rapport, work that into the agenda. So I have some clear guidance.
Powerful. You said something very powerful that before you carry on, I want to reiterate, which is rapport. You can have rapport with someone, meaning you can converse easily, you can have lots in common, you can chit chat. That doesn't mean you trust the person.
Yeah.
So a lot of what I speak about is that trust comes from a feeling of protection from the other.
Yes.
What about you?
Maybe feel that protection. It's interesting. I'm interested in hearing more of the protection. I'm hearing safety in assurance as variants of protection. Right. And my acronym for that, and you viewers out there, you may want to write this down, is say what you mean and then do as you say.
Okay. So
that's the way you will build trust. So if I'm telling you that there is no way I can go below 100 in my negotiation, but 15 minutes later I say, well, how about 90? Right? And there wasn't a break, there wasn't new information that came out. You know that either I was lying or bluffing or puffing before, or that now I'm outside of my authority. One of the two. I've just eroded trust.
Okay.
Right? So trust is, if I tell you I'm going to follow up within a day, I should follow up within a day. If I say I'm going to be there at 1 o'clock for the call, I should be there at 1 o'clock. Those are the ways we're going to build trust. Now, we're reciprocal human beings, so we'll gradually share more information as trust gets built. And you're right. I can dislike the person I'm building trust with. They could be my enemy. In most conflicts, we negotiate with someone who is on the other side, right? But we can build trust. It doesn't mean rapport goes with it. Now, rapport matters as to the pace of trust building, but trust is very easy to erode, right?
Yes.
One time of me lying to you, right? I have a case in the book about an entrepreneur. She's a fabulous doctor, was treating patients, came up with an idea for a startup based on silk technology, started her own company. She was building the company, working on the technology. This investor came in. They reached agreement on what the terms of the investment would be. She went back to building the company. Several weeks later, the draft agreement comes in, and the numbers are different than what they agreed. Right?
That's very, very foundational.
Right. And trust was eroded immediately. She is thinking, and it's in the book and it's on the video, do I really want to have a relationship with this person? Because now we're getting married. Because once an entrepreneur lets an investor in, whose company is it? It's both, right? So her trust was really eroded. Now, we don't know why the numbers were changed. There may have been good reasons, but that surprise, right? That they never negotiated what the process would be, what the norms of behavior would be. So trust was eroded because they were negotiating on separate norms. And I call that negotiate your norms of negotiation.
Wow, negotiate your norms. Negotiate your norms of communication. In the absence of proper information, people come to their own conclusions.
Right.
If you don't provide the proper information, they can make up a story. But you reiterate something, Mooly, that's so important, is if we think about our personal brand is our reputation. It is not something that can be dictated. It is experienced moment by moment, interaction by interaction.
Right.
And everything contributes to that. So what's fascinating in our work together is that you understand the skill, the art, and the science of actual negotiation, but you're also saying that to enter into a trusting contract with another human being or another group of human beings, there are steps that precede that.
Yes. So I think
that's what you teach.
Right. So you want to negotiate a process. And I say negotiate because if you dictate it, you may be impinging on their autonomy.
Right.
So Nadia, why don't we talk about 5 minutes about what I'm interested in, and then we'll talk 5 minutes about what you're interested in, and then we'll start talking proposals. Is that a good process for you? All right, let's go. Now we already have agreement on process. Then we negotiate some norms. Look, Nadia, we're going to meet again in 3 days to continue the discussion. Can we agree that between now and then, both of us don't send any kind of concluded draft of agreement to our back tables so that we continue the discussion in safety? Like you said, right? Those are negotiating norms, negotiating the process. And my tip here is during these COVID times when we're all on Zoom and we all have to do this over video, you need to over communicate. You can't assume that eye contact will do the trick, because we're not really having eye contact. If I'm looking sideways, I may be looking at your image, but you don't know if I'm looking at you or at something else.
Correct.
Right? And your trust gets eroded. I need to tell you what I'm doing. I need to over communicate how I'm feeling, because you can't pick up on my social cues. So I have to verbally express more of my emotional states.
Is that something you talk about now?
Yeah.
Is more animated than you might otherwise have been?
I don't know if animated. I mean, what I'm finding is it's really. Yeah.
Is the word expressive?
Is the word what?
Is the word expressive? Because what he's saying is, don't assume just because you're thinking someone, you almost have to be so much more deliberate in how the other person is receiving you. And then you make another point, which is just to check in with the other person.
Right.
Now, these are foundational communication skills.
They are. And listening is one of the basic negotiation skills. So I can sense, Nadia, that there was some confusion in me using this term that was different, and I could see some nervousness on your end that you're not sure what this means legally. Did I get that right? And the minute you nod and say yes, now we're on the same wavelength. But it required for me to assume I sensed something, but to verbalize it and check in with you.
And that's so masterfully done, because of course in crucial conversations, which is one of the, again, foundational must reads for anybody who wants to master their communication skills,
exactly,
is the ability to not accuse you and not look at you and say, Mooly, you know, you don't understand what I'm saying, or you look confused.
Yeah.
So much more skillful is to say, Mooly, my sense is, am I correct? So I'm checking in with you, and I'm giving you the opportunity to clarify.
Exactly. You're closing that loop of understanding. Exactly.
So it's interesting when you talk about, you know, negotiation is your contract with your significant other, your contract as a manager with your co-workers, with your direct reports. It's often a negotiation with how much do you give? What are the rules here? And if one looks at it in that way, negotiation and life. So let's just summarize for the end of this. What are the key things if we are all going to make 2021 a better year in terms of you asking for what you want and need, but going into scenarios with negotiation skills? So number one is to buy the book. Fantastic. You can get it on Amazon, right, Mooly?
Yes. Yes.
And it is entrepreneurial negotiation. And Mooly will take you through step by step. Then you are also a consultant in the area of individuals, companies who are going through complex negotiations and need the skills.
Yeah. So my background is as an engineer. I'm an aerospace engineer, computer science person.
A pilot.
Right. I've been through several aerospace startups and then others in cyber, education technology, health, different domains. I have a lot of experience in managing teams and being on the executive level, and also on the investor side. For 2 years, I was a venture capitalist, investing in companies and sitting on the boards.
So you know what to be on the other side.
So my knowledge of negotiation and of conflict in business is through years of being a party and trying to renegotiate deals that have gone bad, which happens a lot, right? End up going, in the threat of a lawsuit, trying to go to arbitration or mediation. I then became a mediator myself, so I mediate these disputes as a third party. But most of my work is actually helping people in resolving these disputes through negotiation. Sometimes I serve as the neutral party, helping two parties negotiate. Many times I'm advising one, and sometimes it's advising several players, right? In a recent example is a company who went through internal financing. So there are the founders, there's some of the key executives, and then there are different investors, early investors, later investors, large investors, small investors, and the deal has to be good for all of them in order for all of them to agree. That requires a lot of negotiation, and having a process manager, a skilled, experienced process manager that helps everybody come together is really helpful.
It's so helpful. I mean, you often think about what are the foundational skills that each and every person should have in order to manage their lives and careers better.
Yeah.
So let's talk about managing conflict and being able to negotiate is so important, because how many people who are joining us right now and hearing this conversation have had some kind of fallout, fight, disagreement, either as a result of lack of negotiation or lack of skill or something that could have been resolved.
Right.
But because either party didn't have the skills, I see it all the time. Really, one thing I say, and as a parent to my adult children, is it's very easy to fight with people.
Yeah.
And it's so, and that's on a micro level. On a macro level, I mean, look what the country's been through for the last few years.
Yeah.
Just the inability to listen to someone else's point of view and really listen and feel a sense of respect for a different point of view, even if it isn't yours. I mean, these are foundational things, right?
Yeah, and this is a big part of the training. When I train people, when I either coach them individually or work with teams, or the courses I teach at Harvard and MIT or on my own for corporate clients, listening and being able to sit there with the tension and understand that there is more than one perspective. We talked about that mistake of having that one perspective. Well, there's the other perspective. And then there's this third perspective of what does this look like if I was someone who's not involved coming in to look at this? Oh, this is a typical conflict between siblings in a family business.
Right? Family businesses. My parents had a family business in South Africa. I don't think there's a family business out there that does not need a Mooly. Because remember, this is, you're coming in from a dispassionate point of view, but then there's also just and I'm checking on the time as we speak. Yeah. There's also the deeply emotional. And that's the point is, if you were dealing with automatons, it would be so much easier, but you're dealing with this layer of human emotion. Exactly. And people bring into the negotiation all of their past experience. So it is complicated.
They bring their past experiences, they bring their past judgments, their past perspectives, right? Their own triggers, what triggers them and makes them upset. And like you said, the impact that somebody else's action had on me really triggers me and impacts me, but they may have not had this intent to cause that. And unless we communicate, and unless we can get to a place where I can really listen to what their intent was, really put myself in their shoes and realize why this happened, I will never be able to move forward with how to resolve it in a way that's holistic. I may be able to compromise, but not really resolve it. In a family business or many other situations, we don't have a choice. We can't just divorce. We have to stay in.
But so when we look right now at businesses and at situations, have you ever read an article of a negotiation that just, dissolved because that you go, I wish they had hired me? Because I'm intrigued, if you think about, I worked at CNN for all of nearly 23 years, and there was Ted Turner who started CNN, and then it's bought out, and then what happens to him? And could that have been handled more skillfully?
Yeah, I think enlightened leaders today, and they won't be the ones who play the hero part of, going against all odds, everybody saying no and them saying yes. I mean, that's an extreme stereotype. But the real leaders will have people around them who will offer different perspectives, who will represent them using these different perspectives. And they can still lead, and they can still go with a minority view and convince everybody. But the chance is getting into these heated yes, no kind of take it or leave it situations usually does not help the business. And yes, some of them have been successful. I see many business leaders who've been successful being a bully, and it lasts only to a certain level or only for so long. So their lessons have been, this worked so far, why don't I continue this way?
But it's interesting you say that, because I do also a lot of leadership executive training, and there are people who defy it all, who manage to progress in their careers. But is that the legacy you want?
Right.
Is that how you want to be perceived?
Yeah.
I mean, we could go through, individuals like Steve Jobs. So Steve Jobs was a visionary, and he was passionate, and he was brilliant, and he changed all of our lives. But certainly he was controversial amongst people who worked with him and for him.
Right. And there are different Steve Jobs in different phases of life.
Right.
And Steve Jobs, who got fired for good reasons, is not the Steve Jobs who later got rehired and turned things around.
And evolved and maybe learned.
And learned a lot. So one of the things we've seen with our entrepreneurs, and we have, brave, honest entrepreneurs who shared on video in the book with us their experience, how they failed, the mistakes they've made, and how they learned to fix them, right? And that's the key. The key is you have to have this constant learning cycle. You prepare for a negotiation. You try to prevent the common mistakes you're going to be making. You try to detect when you're making them or about to make them and respond accordingly. And then you have to reflect what works well, what would I do differently, and continue to evolve your practice of negotiation, what we call your theory of practice of negotiation. That's key. And what we see in good leaders is they continue to do that, and they realize that negotiation is a team sport. It's not a solo affair. They have to have good people around them. They have to delegate. They have to listen to other perspectives. And those are some of the key things that I continue to work with individuals. And I must say, a lot of them really want to learn because they know the mistakes they've made. They know how much value has been destroyed or left on the table because of emotion. It could be greed, it could be fear, it could be, but things that don't necessarily describe what was actually happening.
Well, this is what I say, Samuel, Mooly, Dinnar. We may not get to the Harvard School of Negotiation, but you have given us such wisdom, insight. You know, you and I discuss this often, the value of doing interviews like this, being able to have a true thought leader like you share your brilliance with us. And I'm certainly going to look at negotiation very differently, but it also just reminds me and reinforces that there are certain universal truths, and that compassion, empathy, seeing the world from another point of view is so critical for both personal and professional success. If anybody would like to reach you or get a copy of the book, please remind us how to do that.
So the book, Entrepreneurial Negotiation, Samuel Dinnar and Larry Susskind, my good friend and colleague at MIT and the Harvard Program on Negotiation. We have a website, entrepreneurialnegotiation.com. You can find more details about events and buying the book and watching some of the videos there. And if you want to reach me, you can send me an email, sdinnar@Meedance, which is my consulting and dispute resolution company, Meedance, MEEDANCE.com.
And I will tell you that Mooly is part of a group of thought leaders that I am part of, brilliant individuals like Mooly. And I am so delighted that we will share other thought leadership interviews and insights. And the group is called GIFT, which stands for Global Institute
for Thought Leadership.
For Thought Leadership. So I'm excited to be interviewing you not only in your personal capacity, but also as part of this remarkable group of individuals who are all working to help motivate others, to help understand what business is looking for today and how we can all help move organizations and individuals forward and hopefully heal, right, Mooly, from a particularly brutal year.
Yes. And, you know, there is going to be a lot of change. Change involves a lot of conflict, which requires a lot of negotiation, which requires a lot of speaking, listening, and, you know, and ideas on how to adapt to this ever-changing world. And these ideas is what I think our group of thought leaders is so good at talking through and harnessing for executive leaders or community leaders to actually deploy in the world.
Luckily, we have that on tape. Beautifully said. To everyone joining us who is going to be celebrating Christmas on Friday, just a very, very Merry Christmas. Happy holidays. And let's just hope, Mooly, that our negotiations and our conversations continue to be as interesting as this. Thank you so much.
Amen. See you in 2021.